This simple chord may not look like much, and it may even be a chord that you're already familiar with, but if you take a closer look, you will find that not only will it help you memorize the location of all intervals, but it's also the secret to building every chord. If you were to overlap this chord with a major scale starting from the same root note, you would find that the intervals contained within this chord are the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th degrees of the major scale. And if we check our chord formula to find out what we would call this chord based off of these intervals, we would have a major 7th chord. So nothing particularly special, simply a major triad, 1, 3, 5, plus an added 7th. But given that most chords you most commonly come across will contain a root, or 1, a 3rd, 5th, and some kind of 7th interval, then this shape acts as a great starting point or template to learn these interval locations, and adjust them depending on the chord you wish to play. For example, starting with our template chord, we can build a dominant 7th chord with one simple adjustment. If we take a look at our chord formula, you will see that the only difference between a major 7th chord and a dominant 7th chord is that the 7th interval has been flattened, so all we need to do is lower the 7th interval by 1 fret. From here, we can turn our dominant 7th chord into a minor 7th chord. As you can see, again, the only difference between these chords is the 3rd, which has now been flattened. So once again, we can lower the 3rd by 1 fret, revealing a minor 7th chord. Now we could turn this into a minor 6th chord, which contains the intervals 1, flat 3, 5, and 6, by lowering the flat 7 once more, showing the location of a 6th interval. And once here, we can make this a major 6th chord by raising the flat 3rd up to a major 3rd, so 1 fret. Now let's take a brief break from building chords to recap the intervals found on the D string when compared to the root note of the E string. The first interval to take note of that we actually have not covered in any of the previous examples is an octave. This of course occurs after counting through all 7 notes of the major scale and returning back to the first note again, making this note identical to the root note but 1 octave higher. 1 fret lower than this is a major 7th, and 1 fret lower than that would be a minor 7th, and finally 1 fret lower reveals a 6th, or in the case of a fully diminished 7th chord you would refer to this as a double flat 7. Memorizing these intervals on the D string will help tremendously when recalling their locations in future, so take a quick mental snapshot of this. Returning back to our original major 7 template chord, you will find that the next interval that occurs on the G string this time is a major 3rd. Lowering this by 1 half step or fret reveals a minor 3rd, which is incredibly important to know as all major chords will contain major 3rds while minor chords contain minor 3rds. Some chords, such as suspended chords, for example sus4 or sus2 chords, might however replace the 3rd with a 4th or a 2nd. So it's useful to note that the 4th can be found 1 half step or fret above the 3rd, while the 2nd can be found 1 whole step or 2 frets below the 3rd. Once again, take a mental note of these intervals so that you can recall them whenever you need to. The final string that we need to focus on is the B string. In our major 7th template chord, you will find the 5th interval. 1 fret higher reveals a sharp 5 interval, and 1 fret lower reveals a flat 5 interval, otherwise known as a tritone. You will often see chords with a sharpened or flattened 5th in jazz charts, for example G7 sharp 5, or perhaps G minor 7 flat 5. So knowing the location of your 5th is essential to being able to quickly make these alterations to common chords. You can also find the location of a 6th interval 2 frets above any 5th, so in this case that would be here on the 5th fret. So here are all the relevant intervals discussed so far on the D, G and B strings. Once again, take a good mental snapshot of all the intervals found on these 3 strings. Now you will probably have realized that when overlapping the major scale with our template chord, I've chosen to disregard the intervals found on the A string and E string. And while I would encourage you to learn these, I would first advise that you begin with the D, G and B strings, as you will find the most common chord grips based off of an E string root will use these strings the majority of the time. To know the location of extensions such as 9ths, 11ths and 13ths, you simply need to remember that 9ths are 2nds, 11ths are 4ths and 13ths are 6ths. So 2, 4, 6. Although there are some rules to when you would refer to each of these as 2nds, 4ths or 6ths, or in fact 9ths, 11ths and 13ths, which I explain in my in-depth video on chord formula linked at the end of this video. So memorizing the location of the intervals that fall within this chord will allow you to build any chord you wish, provided that you know your chord formula for each chord type. So I would strongly encourage you to now click on this video, which will show you the chord formula for every chord type and how to memorize this without a reference. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.